Welcome to Daily Variety, your daily dose of news and analysis for entertainment industry insiders. It's Tuesday, June 16th, 2026. I'm your host, Cynthia Littleton. I am co-editor-in-chief of Variety alongside Ramin Satuda. I'm in LA, he's in New York, and Variety has reporters around the world covering the business of entertainment. On today's episode, in our cover story segment, Variety's Gene Maddaus unpacks the brawl that has erupted as Hollywood's systemic problems become a pivotal political issue in the race for LA mayor and California governor. And he reports on the growing head of steam to push for a federal production tax incentive to help alleviate some of the problem, at least within the United States. But before we get to all that, here are a few headlines just in this morning that you need to know. Guillermo del Toro charmed the intimate crowd at Mother Wolf on Monday night as the Oscar-winning director was celebrated by the British Film Institute with its fellowship honor. Del Toro used the opportunity at the podium to sound the alarm about what he sees as threats to filmmaking from the steady march of AI and political pressures around the world. He spoke with trademark passion about the film business, taking it all the way back to the work of cave paintings. He is definitely worried about the rise of the machines. Del Toro told the crowd, quote, "We are on the verge of cinema illiteracy," end quote. Taking all this in the room was Netflix's Ted Sarandos, Bella Bajaria, and Dan Lin, Warner Brothers' Pam Abdi, Leonardo DiCaprio, Jon Favreau, Sherry Lansing, and Michael Mann. Universal Studios is consolidating two of its TV production labels. Universal Content Productions will merge with Universal International Television, all under the leadership of Beatrice Springborn. Dolphin Entertainment and Kinetic Media Studios have joined forces to launch Graviteer Studios. The venture looks to support creators who want to make the leap into mainstream TV and film. Graviteer aims to target projects budgeted at $1 million to $10 million. All of these stories and so much more can be found on Variety.com right now. And now it's time for conversations with Variety journalists about news and trends in show business. Gene Maddaus, Variety's senior media writer, dove headfirst into the morass of Southern California's many problems, and he came out with a cover story. Gene, thanks for joining me.
Happy to do it.
Well, Gene, you tackled quite a Byzantine subject for this week's cover story. You've taken a look at the state of film and TV production in Southern California. You've taken a look at how the slump there has intersected with this state's and the city of Los Angeles' very fractious politics right now. And you also, in your reporting, you have found that hanging over all of this, like hopefully a silver lining, will be this push in Congress for a federal production tax incentive program, which is something that people in Hollywood have been agitating for years, always seemed out of reach. But maybe the situation has gotten so dire now for the U.S., for California specifically, but also for the U.S., that maybe there is, dare I say it, some bipartisan momentum to at least considering this idea. Gene, what was the spark of inspiration for doing this story right now?
Honestly, it was Baywatch, and this was announced last November as, hey, Baywatch is coming back to LA, and isn't that great? And we're bringing production jobs back to Los Angeles, and it's this great victory for California. And it's obviously receiving a large tax incentive from the state of California. And a lot of politicians were involved, and Governor Newsom and so on, saying, isn't this great that it's coming back? And then a few months later, what do we hear? They're actually running into trouble. And there's problems with permitting, and can we light fires, and can we park our trucks, and that kind of stuff. And so it just seemed like that kind of captured the macro in the micro, this sort of big problem they have of like how to bring production back, and the obstacles they're having in doing that, and why is it so difficult to do something that was 30 years ago naturally thought of as just part of the backdrop of Los Angeles, and now it's so difficult to get this done, and why is it so much more difficult now than when they first made Baywatch in Los Angeles 30 years ago?
It feels like we've hit that proverbial rock bottom position with so many people out of work that the impact of this post-strike shutdown is just being felt every single day, and it's gotten people galvanized. You talk to a lot of veteran producers that have produced in Los Angeles for many years, but haven't produced in LA in years because there is so much push and pull. Hollywood's problems have really become the big factor in both the LA mayor's race and the state's gubernatorial race. As we saw leading into the June 2nd primary, there was advertisement after advertisement focused on, "We'll bring Hollywood jobs back." That was a first for me, and I've lived here most of my life, to see Hollywood become directly cited in local campaigns. It was always seen that Hollywood was that exclusive elite group of people, and who would have thought that you needed to give tax money to keep Hollywood at home? What did you sense from talking to people about, like, the level of real understanding of what's going on in the business, and what can the governor, what can the mayor of Los Angeles actually bring to the table to help the problem?
The key thing here is these trends about, production going overseas and, tax incentives being offered in other states and other countries, like that is not new. That's been going on for 30 years. We talked about runaway production in the 90s going to Canada, and it's been continuous since then. What is new is the post-peak slump, right? Which has much more to do with business models and interest rates and the pivot to profitability that, Netflix and all these other companies have been doing for the last 3-4 years, right? But that has led to this dramatic decline in jobs and this perspective from the unions, particularly, of what can we do to keep the jobs that remain, right? And that's where the focus on how can we not just get a California incentive, but get a federal incentive to compete with all these other incentives. That's where that comes from. So it's interesting, and sort of the cause and the solution are two separate ideas. But in terms of what can politicians do, the state of California has already done quite a lot in terms of doubling its own production incentive. And you could say, well, that hasn't been enough, but there is also a limit to what California even can do. And so that's a lot of the reason people are turning to Washington for a federal incentive. Then there's the question of what can the mayor do? They can help with permitting and expediting and cutting red tape and all of that sort of thing. And all the candidates promise to do that. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to incentives in terms of what moves the needle on a production decision. Like, are we going to shoot here? Are we going to shoot somewhere else? And I should say, it's not just that other countries offer lucrative incentives and the United States doesn't. It's also that it's much cheaper to shoot in other countries, even if there weren't incentives. So when you compound the fact that there's not a federal incentive in the United States with the fact that it is also more expensive to shoot in the United States, it explains a lot of why producers are going overseas.
As much as you think, how can it possibly, with all the travel costs and having to build sets on another continent, and how you manage those long term? And every studio physical production executive that you talk to says, yes, the math is that different in other countries. I was in London 2 weeks ago, and privately, people are talking about, yes, there's a boom in London production, but a lot of it is work for hire. And quite frankly, there are US studios going to London and Europe. They're going for, obviously, there's incredible talent, but it's also lower cost labor. That is the capitalist instinct, and there's no getting around that. Federal tax incentive would help against Canada and Australia and that kind of competition, but it wouldn't really ameliorate what is a real problem for California, which is competition from Georgia and North Carolina and other places.
This conversation about incentives in states has been very much, Georgia's stealing California's jobs, or New York, stealing from New Jersey, or New Jersey is stealing from New York, and that kind of thing. A federal incentive involves all of those states sort of linking arms and saying, we need to team up and combat these national level incentives in Canada, Australia, and all these other places. So it is sort of strange bedfellows in that respect. In terms of, like, if there were a federal incentive, would that help California? Absolutely. It would also help a bunch of states where there are no incentives currently. Florida is a big one that used to have some sort of incentives and now doesn't. Other states coming up, Texas and places like that. So it would help a bunch of places, not just California. And in fact, if you're selling this in Washington, the last thing you want to say is this is going to help California and Hollywood. You want to emphasize how it's going to help everybody around the country in all 50 states and so on.
Yes, for this administration, the less blue, the better, for sure.
Right. In any administration, it's going to have to be a bipartisan effort to get this done. So there are Democrats today who will tell you, yes, I support this 100%. They're in need of Republicans who will say the same thing. And so far, they're not there.
One thing I noted from your reporting, actually not in the cover story, but one of the many other hats you wear covering labor and the guilds, and in the Directors Guild of America, they just completed its tentative deal with the major studios and streamers for their master contract. And in that, they pointed out the job situation has gotten so bad, they've had a more than 30% drop, that they actually baked into the DGA's master contract some rules that limit the number of non-career directors that can take TV episodic directing assignments. And they told us that there's a formula, but it basically boils down to there are often times when TV stars or maybe a producer, people get the urge to step behind the camera and direct an episode. And the DGA is saying that the job situation is so acute for working TV directors that they made a point of baking into their contract limitations so that if your star decides one day, I really want to try directing, there's limited opportunities for that assignment to go to that person. They are telling us that they have a whole formula built out for the actors that very genuinely are also pursuing careers as directors. And it's not just aimed at actors, but that is the handy example where you often see that actors very genuinely get the urge to learn more about the craft and take the helm. Well, that will be harder for them to do because there will be limited slots. It's all a response to the drop in jobs, and we're just seeing it every which way.
They went into the negotiation focused on jobs, healthcare, AI. Really, all three of those have to do with jobs, right? The healthcare issue, the reason that the health funds are all in trouble is because fewer contributions are going into the health plans because of the dramatic downturn in production. The AI thing is the fear of future job loss, right? That's what AI is about. The issue of what can we do to protect our members, our career directors who feel like they are not getting enough opportunities, and that other people who are not career directors or not serious about being directors are taking their jobs from them. So they've built those protections in there. They also, one provision is that they will now join hands with the studios, high-level executives from the studios, to go to Washington and lobby for a federal production incentive. That is a major component of this deal as well. That is unique and unusual. That would be built in. Like, obviously, they can't negotiate between themselves to get a federal production incentive, but they've negotiated between themselves to at least lobby for one. So that's another.
It's a place where management and labor's interests are aligned for sure in terms of trying to get that done. And all of this is happening against the backdrop of Paramount going step by step closer to buying Warner Brothers Discovery. We know that there are going to be a lot of job losses as a result of that. There is no way that they bring those two together without laying off significant people that will become duplicative. So it is by no means blue skies here for Hollywood and California. I so appreciate your expertise in tracking the beat by beat of what's happening in both in this city and in the industry.
Happy to do it.
As we close out today's episode, here's a few things we're watching for. Keep an eye out for Young Washington. The latest theatrical release from Angel Studios looks at the formative years of George Washington, with William Franklin Miller taking on the role of the father of our country. Young Washington will premiere June 23rd in Nashville, and it will hit theaters on July 2nd. Also on the patriotic theme, The American Experiment is a 5-part documentary about these United States that is set to debut June 24th on Netflix. It's narrated by one of our foremost national treasures, Tom Hanks, and it was produced by his Playtone banner. The Annecy Festival of Animation in France begins on Sunday. It's become a big date on the annual calendar for those who work in Toontown. We'll produce the first of 6 digital dailies out of Annecy starting on June 19th. We love to hear from our listeners, so please send thoughts, gripes, and other feedback about Daily Variety to podcasts@variety.com. Before we go, congrats to Matt McLaughlin. He's been promoted to Senior VP of Ad Sales for Fox. He oversees sales for the company's 29 television stations across the country. McLaughlin has worked for Fox television stations for 25 years. Thanks for listening. This episode was written and reported by me, Cynthia Littleton, with contributions from Gene Maddaus. Stick, snicks, hick, picks. Please leave us a review at the podcast platform of your choice, and don't forget to tune in tomorrow for another episode of Daily Variety.